communication between Mars and the various branch. Mechanicums has always been tenuous on the best of days. Interred within the deepest and holiest chambers of each forge world lies the high altar of technology, a grand database and communications array designed to store knowledge of all things of highest importance to the cult mechanicum and feed such most critical data into the living. Transmat. The living transmat is a servitor created from one found to have high immaterial presence. Once such an individual is found, they must be reshaped in all forms to be utterly identical to all other living transmats. The slightest deviations from such will render the principle of uncertain place ineffective, and the living transmat will no longer be able to commune with other iterations of itself. Of course, with such vast distances between each forge world, the chaotic twisting of the immaterium will render even the surest connection unclear and unreliable. For best results, communication is carried out through relays. Griffon sends a message to one of its 8 systems. From there, the message is sent to their closest neighboring branch. Mechanicum, with notice of intended recipient, they will, in turn, send the message to their closest neighbor along the route of communion until the message arrives at the intended destination. It is slow, it is prone to many points of failure, it is far quicker and less hazardous than delivery of physically inscribed data through shipping transit. It was the surest and speediest line of communication humanity currently possessed. It was the reason why, as the rest of the galaxy fell into darkness, the faith preserved the sparks of civilization. It is the means through which Mars delivered the good word unto the branch, Mechanicums. Rejoice, rejoice, the Omnisia has arrived. Short years later, Griffon was greeted with foreign ships, a giant humanoid, and an offer of alliance involving Xenos. The giant was almost attacked at that moment, but his father cautioned against rash action and declared that they would do as they always have done. Gather information, consult the old word, and then decide upon a course of action. With the grumbling of ancient generals, the ruling priesthood agreed, and the proposal of the stranger was heard in full. What followed was recorded in full, and a cogitator dedicated solely to storing it. An outlined grand stratagem to conquer the entire southern fifth of the galaxy, nearly 20,000 worlds already occupied by humanity, and nearly 10 times that number occupied by Xenos, abominable intellects, and hostile immateria interactions. Little to any particular surprise, some 150,000 of the worlds outlined were summarized as infested by orcs, recommend virus bombardment, and subsequent terraforming. Nearly 20,000 worlds, their broad characteristics classified, information provided on each, and a recommended course of action to integrate each with level of assumed difficulty and priority on all. It was raw data in such incredible bulk and scope as to dwarf the actionable intellect Griffon had on the galaxy at large, let alone the local arm of the galaxy. Then began the interrogation of the giant, of the specifics of his plan and details therein, of the elaborations upon uncertain sections and backup plans at large. All of which was answered with a thoroughness and precise thought that would be expected of an archmagos of any particular subject. The giant was interrogated on many subjects. It had taken the Forge Empire of Griffon several thousand years to take and secure 8 systems containing 28 worlds in total. The giant had suggested a course of action to create an empire that would, on average, conquer 1,000 worlds each year, with considerations for exponential growth and 200 years of timescale. A fierce period of internal council followed. The measures were taken and the plan reviewed in excessive detail. The scholars of pure thought reached the conclusion that, assuming the information provided was accurate, the plan was sound. From there it became a matter of probabilism and pragmatism. Even if only to assert as much influence as possible over this rising power, they would join the alliance. In this manner, they can dictate the terms of what technologies are permissible and shape its path forwards. Should this power prove to be an agent of false testimony, they would use the power gained to strike a crippling blow into its heart with the aid of their fellow branch, Mechanicums. Should this power prove to be an agent of honest testimony and the data accurate, they would be able to guide its path to ensure it does not fall into all-consuming heresy. So the Forge Empire of Griffon agreed to the alliance, but dictated terms of such. The use of xenomaterial and xenoscience was to be kept to the minimum degrees possible as they investigated it more thoroughly, granting them time for deeper investigations and conclusions. The basics agreed upon were of basic forms. All items of wraithbone used by human hands must be a simple weapon or tool, the outer plates of armoring, or a webway's gate. This was agreed upon, the Charter of Xyz was signed, and Griffon purchased for themselves a century of time in which to study and influence the policies of this rising power. A tentative period of early cooperation. The following 6 years had proved the Giant's information accurate, within a 2% margin of error. The following 6 years had proved that the Giant was not a bringer of false binary. The following 6 years had seen the integration of 400 worlds, the raising of 80 war fleets, and the slaughter of countless horrors of the Long Night. Many among the priesthood of Griffon had begun to openly call King Roboute the Warmind, Grand Cogitator, and Sword of the Omnisire. Carl Calculatus was one of those priests. He had witnessed the man's actions from the beginning. He had tutored the Lady Petra until he had nothing left to educate her upon. A period that only took 3 years, blessed as she was by the Omnisire, and currently followed by 3 years of endless wonders produced by her quill and cognition. He had borne witness to the warring and the actions the man took upon himself. The man was worth following. The Xenos he brought with him were more potentially problematic, within reasonable ability to tolerate, but problematic. For Mars would not know what they knew, the communications between living, transmates uncertain on the best of days and devoid of important contextual data. He knew the debating would grow fierce the day they were able to establish more firm lines of communication with Holy Mars. The debating was always fierce in matters as grave as these, for this was a matter of faith and politics. In the immense debate hall built upon Baston, near the centre of the primary factory cathedral, commissioned upon the capital world of Albion by the Warmind himself, a grand number of tech priests from Mars and Griffon were well within the process of most rigorous dialogue. Robes of red, silver and black filled one half of the chamber, while robes of white, gold and grey filled the other half. Learned men of faith and science, sitting in seething tents quiet as speaker after speaker rose to speak, dictated to by the highest ranking among them. At the end of the debate hall, a truly immense figure sat. In accordance with the sacred unit of 12, all standard measures followed. A single Martian rule was composed of 12 first-power micro-rules, and in turn composed 1/12 of a first-power macro-rule. A second-power micro-rule was, again, 1/12 of a first-power micro-rule, and similarly a second-power macro-rule was composed of 12 first-power macro-rules. This pattern continued indefinitely in contraction and expansion, and was the standard by which all things were measured. The Warmind, clad in his armour, was precisely 1 first-power macro-rule in height, an auspicious sign. The figure that oversaw the dialogues of priests was 1.5 first-power macro-rules in height, from Carl's general estimation. 12 cybernetic arms emerged from the immense and armoured torso, 6 on either side, 4 sets clasped together in the 4 prime prayers, 1 set delicately maintaining the gentle smouldering of becalming incense, and the last set reserved for directing the actions of the 12 cogitators, 12 servitors, 12 attendant engiziers, and 12 subordinate logis priests. The figure was clad in robes of sacred armor-weave, mantled in the ceremonial badges of one who observes impartially, and dressed in the seals that represent his authority among the faithful. Prime Hermeticon and Attendant. Voice of the Martian Parliament, herald of the will of Mars. He had been introduced to the Griffon delegation as Pontus the Elder. A single great red optic stared out from under the shadows of Pontus's cloak, and beheld the procession before him. Carl did his best to not glance at the immense presence too often, instead granting the majority of his processing to the critical words being exchanged before him. Words being exchanged in holy binaric, of course. No other language was suitable for conveying truth between adherents. Currently speaking was the second highest ranked tech priests of Griffon, Fabricator, locum of Griffon IV, second in command to his own Lord Fabricator Father. Steel-faced Oswald, speaking clear and pleasing binaric, and looking about the chamber with plasma-blue optics, stately and handsome with his white robes and smooth grey plates. In accordance with the word, no priest of Griffon has laid hands on any example of xenotechnology, save in the context of study, an act directly permissible and required in book Xenilea, to know the limits of the alien mechanism, so that it may be accounted for in the diction's war cognition. To not do so is to leave oneself open to the dangers therein. Do we not seek to understand the fundamental forces? Nay, learning of the tolerances of their mechanism is a requirement to combat it. In accordance with the standards of probabilism, we resolved to focus our efforts on the containment and limitations of the alien influence in this burgeoning power until such a time that the Omnissiah and the priesthood primus could arrive to give proper judgment. We have prevented any true alien mechanism from being used by human hands, foundational shape solely, and the sole example of xenotech in mass use being exclusively controlled by xenohands. Bronze, plasteel, adamantium. None of these are machines, as outlined in Book Avalonians. They are materials to be shaped. If we acted with haste to smite the one named Malum Caedo before receiving the judgment of the Omnissiah, would that not be a most grave sin? Should Malum Caedo be the son of the Omnissiah, as he proclaimed and demonstrated such cognition as evidence, and we struck him down with blade and fire, we would be rightfully condemned, our higher reasons stripped from us in servitorhood. Should he prove to be a false witness, then we have acted to limit the presence of the alien within his domain long enough for the Omnissiah and his fleets to arrive and smite him. Our actions are utterly unclouded, our cognition clear, guided by the wisdom of the machine god. A grand hand of Pontus rose, and Oswald bowed as he stepped back, and another priest stepped forwards. It was theoretically possible to ask the Omnissiah directly on these matters, but such was quietly set aside for now, with hopes that the matter could be resolved internally. After all, neither side wished to be given word from their god that they were incorrect. It was too risky. Clad in the long robes of an administrative magos, bearing a blessed skull face and dressed in gently swaying tendrils of mechadendrites. With cold and hard binaric, the Archmagus spoke. The use of technology is defined as to receive the boon of its usage, as outlined in the logic psalms. Have not members of your priesthood travelled through the network array of xeno-construction? Have they not travelled within ships of alien origin? In what manner can that not be defined as the usage of technology, xenotech at that? The good books, Gathalamorians and aphorisms are explicit, what manners the xeno should be treated with. I quote the passages now. Look not upon the alien, for the alien looks back. He who prosecutes the alien with zeal is an ally of mankind. And be thou wary of the works of the alien, for their presence is poison, and their every word deceit. Do these passages not ring true? Are these passages difficult to comprehend? The only manner in which one should deal with the alien is with fire and holy annihilation. If Malum Caedo prove to be the son of the Omnissiah, it is best to rid him of the corruptive influences entirely. If he prove to be a bringer of false testimony, it is an obligation to slay his Xenos and bring him before the Omnissiah for proper termination of function. In either case, the aliens about him should have been put to the cog, not allowed to step foot on your worlds and within your systems, not met as equals or allies. Have you forgotten the lessons of the age of strife? There are no friends to be found among the alien, only hidden blades. The hand of Pontus rose, and the priest returned to his side. Oswald stood once more, and did his part in reply. I must first address the subject of the parallel realm known as the Webway. It is, to our knowledge, not an invention of the Xenos. It predates them even according to their own records, and we theorize it to be of naturally occurring origin. Just as natural caves form underneath the seas of material worlds, so too did these tunnels form naturally as a realm within the realm of the immaterial. The Xenos only contributed so far as mapping out these tunnels and clearing sections of diffuse psychic energies. The realm itself is, again, not xenotechnology. It is in the very passage you quote that our uncertainty was found. Gathalamorians 64:1. He who prosecutes the alien with zeal is an ally of mankind. The Xenos in this regard are distaff from their wider kind. Exodites is the term used by Malum Caido, defined as those who explicitly rejected their wider society of great xeno-degeneracies and blasphemies, those that rejected their xenotechnology to live out primitive lives upon their homeworlds. In the presentation of Malum Caido, of which records have been provided by our scholar of pure thought, he outlines the exacting manner in which to deal with their wider kin. I quote his words now. Of particular note are the urbanite eldar, who have spent much of the last 50,000 years or more indulging in every manner of perversion imaginable. It is recommended by the Exodites that you attack and kill these on sight. Fleeing is unlikely to be an option with the speeds of their ships, but every one that you kill inflicts a massive loss to their empire, as they can no longer replenish their numbers as effectively due to the formation of what they call the Womb of Destruction, a warp vortex, a strong recommendation to attack and destroy on sight, which provided context that such will inflict now irreplaceable wounds to. It is rare to encounter Xenos that embody these traits. An explicit rejection of their kin in exchange for an alliance with mankind and free offering of nigh total support in the quest to expand mankind's dominion. Xenos choosing humanity over their fellow Xenos. The situation had never occurred before, and in the absence of the judgment of the Omnissiah, we resolved to engage in the probabilioristic manner until a higher authority could be called upon. And, unto this, did not the Omnissiah greet the alien priestess with returned flattery? Did not the Omnissiah take note of the traits that indicate a properly functioning biology, the mechanisms of chemical alchemy, the natural mechanism? Furthermore, taking note of the xenobiology in question. Text of the oiled cog states as follows. One can verge from the standard form, but one must always retain their humanity, or be lost to the men of iron and their ways. Tell me, has any Xeno been found to so closely resemble the standard form of human? Their differences are in internal function and external efficacy, but their scale and performances are well within the bounds of the genetic alchemy of the Omnisiah's golden host. What are you proposing, you heretic? Came the roar of a priest, who spoke out of turn, clad in heavy plates and the whirring of steam clouds and furious tramping. Do you suggest that these mongrels, these aliens, have any relation to most blessed mankind? I would suggest in turn that your cogitation is wasted on such a dull mind. I would suggest in turn that your own bloated form is an utter waste of material. One of the many techprists of Griffon now stood, shouting in furious binary back at the new speaker before Oswald could respond. UNFI for war, unfit for US, only fit to extend the capacity of fuel tanks far in excess of what is required for 10 faithful magi. For the 5th time in the last 36 minutes, the screaming of binary began to roar out as more and more furious and ill-tempered voices joined the fray. This one would end up taking 3 Terran standard minutes to calm sufficiently to continue the dialogues. The dialogues were scheduled to continue for 1 Terran week without pause, coinciding with the planned departure date of the Omnissiah's fleet. Carl suspected it would be very similar to the first 36 minutes. All too frequently, the affairs of faith are influenced by the realities of the present. The interpretations of Scripture adjusted to suit the situation at hand. This was expected, this was normal, for the priesthood is the hand of the machine god, and in turn, a machine. When replacement components are no longer available for an understood machine, it is the responsibility of the Magi to understand the machine, to know the machine, to know its tolerances and truths, and to find suitable substitute components until such a time in which the proper order can be re-established. The branch mechanicums have deviated much from the pattern of Scripture during the Age of Strife. This had been predicted long in advance by the Logis Magi of Mars. Their current situation forcing replacement interpretations to ensure the grand machine of the Forge world remained operational, remained useful. Each branch mechanicum rejoined with its own deviations, and each worked with varying degrees of adherence to pattern, efficacy, and efficiency. Most minor deviations could be ignored for the moment. Many greater deviations had to be addressed in the immediate sense. A few forge worlds, unfortunately, had long fallen to abominable intellects, xenos, or worse, by the time stable data feed was re-established. His schedule of funerary rites for them was backlogged for the next 3 years thus far. He had no desire to extend that backlog any further, but he had no expectations it would remain at 3 years either. Cease, he commanded in firm binary audio transmitting over every local frequency. All at once the shouting priesthood stopped. Terminate this exchange line, return, and begin once more at line 4123-4112. The priests of Mars and Griffon returned to that line in their dialogues and proceeded onwards. He had to do this frequently, lest the rambunctious youth revert to immature subject designations. The most recent example saw accusations of being circumcellions, arguing in a circular and aggravating manner a non-useful line of data exchange. At least, that was what he assumed the accusation was. There was a small chance that Priest Morshal was accusing the Griffon speaker of wandering aimlessly in hopes of testing his war implants on whatever happened by. It would hardly be the most unexpected insult levied at this exchange, much less from one of young Cincinnatus's students. Optics blinking in gratitude, the speaker of Griffon began once more. Pontus recorded it idly, but it was not his duty to provide his own decision until the final moments. He was here to administrate the debate, then pass judgment on behalf of the Martian Parliament. The judgment had been calculated and decided within the first quarter hour of the data exchange, his internal cogitators parsing and analyzing the raw data exchanged through their priests of pure thought. By strict reading of the scripture, Griffon had committed tech heresy. This was known to all parties present. Griffon had argued their position strongly, the priests of Mars had argued their position strongly, but all was simply to exhaust those present of their hotter emotions so that they would listen to his judgment. He did not care for this place of power. His preference was to act as a teacher, an educator, and to busy himself not with the internal exchanges of hidden truths and accumulation of power. His self-enforced neutrality had, in time, given way to something much too troublesome. Authority is a well-regarded mediator. They had begun to speak of his immense level-headedness. 1823 years ago, he remembered the very day. Leaning into the gentle jesting, he had ensured the top of his optic suite had been made as flat and even as the archaeo machines of Mars could manage. His students at that time were quite pleased to see such. All of them had long expired. The list of names in one of his sub-databanks, long and mournful indeed. There was a gentle melancholy in a long life, but he would not exchange this blessed existence for any other, for he had the pleasure of living to see the Omnisires coming. With his own optics he had borne witness to one who met all qualifications of that holy avatar, and now they could travel the galaxy to set right the many wrongful mechanisms worn and malfunctioning from centuries of disrepair. He did not care for his place of authority, but he accepted it without complaint, to do his part in mending these errors in function between mechanicums, to do his part in mending the wider galaxy. Pontus the Elder considered himself blessed for the gift of this work, yet another thing he was compelled to thank the machine god for. He had installed another set of subarms with the announcement of the Great Crusade, so that he might clasp them in yet more prayer to join with his other 3 sets. What else could possibly express his gratitude? For all things he had been blessed to receive, he could do nothing less. 12 arms in total now, an ideal number. He was confident that he would gain no more after this. Cease, he gently commanded again, subroutines alerting his wider consciousness. Fallacy, illicit substitution of identicals. Terminate this exchange line and return to line 4000, 2000, 1023, 634. An internal Vox line requested a data exchange, and with warmth in his ancient servos he accepted it. A voice of fumbling flesh tongues came over the Vox from the great figure sitting next to him, the most honored observer of this overall exchange. Lady Petra, primarch wrought by the Omnissiah, spoke in blunt questioning through the private data feed. What is monarchianism? Jacurism? A historical inquiry. Monarchianism is the prevailing doctrine within the Mechanicum that, regardless of internal disputes, the priesthood must present a unified front to the wider galaxy. It is often fallaciously cited to support uncompromising and unquestioning obedience to one's authorities, primarily the ruling priesthood of Mars and the Martian Parliament. I see. Lady Petra responded, her childhood outside of the priesthood obvious by the use of metaphorical language. Pontus found the experience of educating her quite refreshing. It was rare that he had the opportunity to aid a student beyond the internal culture of the Mechanicum. She was primarily raised by her brother, another entity wrought by the Lord Omnissiah's hands, and a fascinating example to study. It was well known through analysis of present data that each construct, child of the Omnissiah, was suitable for different purposes. This was obvious through examination of their training periods and carefully recorded lines from the Lord Omnissiah himself. This was not fully confirmed, but the most likely theory to arise thus far. Most were wrought for conquest, for battle, for diplomacy. This was a prudent measure to take by the Lord Omnissiah, as there would be no shortage of battles to be had in the wider galaxy, and he could not be present at all of them. Creating a number of daughters to serve as most efficacious generals and warriors was only sensible. All of them seemed fit for this exact purpose, their links to the legions of Adeptus Astartes obvious. Generals first, warriors or otherwise secondary. Most blessed indeed was Lady Petra, her gift evident with overwhelming data. She was wrought by the Omnissiah as a font of miracles, as a font for patterns without end. 144 variants of that basic human template machine arm. 12 per hour, for 12 hours, before she finally put the provided pen to rest. Pontus considered himself blessed to witness such a miracle. All daughters of the Omnissiah seemed wrought for general purposes. Generals first, then an additional specialization inherent to their biological machinery. It was their brothers that this pattern did not hold fast to. Lord Archangel was a machine of a specific purpose, to annihilate all warp phenomena with impunity. Warp phenomena he designated chaoses with furious roars. Their recordings of him in combat were truly beautiful things, his own design shifting itself to become more and more efficient through consumption, recycling of tainted warp energy. A machine that increases in effectiveness the more it fulfills its purpose is a potentially very dangerous thing, the horrors of the machine rebellion making that clear in Scripture. The Lord Omnissiah had addressed this as well. The Archangel automatically returning to lower stages of effectiveness without present tainted warp energies. The Archangel returning to a state of idle dormancy without direct orders. A weapon that contains itself, if not in use. A most wonderful design. It was the other brother that was both incredibly obvious in specialization and quite confusing in detail. Cease. Fallacy. Ad hominem. Terminate this exchange line and return to line 4000-13085-4. The exchanged information from the scholars of pure thought on the profile Griffon had accumulated thus far, in conjunction with pre-established information on the children of the Omnissiah, made it obvious what role Malum Caedo was to fulfill. I know little of the laws of the machine god. I shall not claim otherwise. I am a statesman, a general, and a man of logistical incline. I am not a priest, nor an engineer, nor a man of science. The great figure spoke through a psychoplastic helm of the human skull. I request to make my proposal in full, at least, and allow ye learned men to cast judgment upon it once it is fully explained. Function, administration of state. Subfunctions, combat, diplomacy, strategy, instruction. The name was another outlying data point. I kill evil. There was simply incomplete information at hand. A definitive conclusion on the intended function could not be reached at this time. The priesthood of Griffon had done well to record all available information on this subject and the empire it was forging. With records provided on the technical performance and function of xenotechnology, wraithbone and webway, there was an initial hypothesis forming within his cogitators. Malum Caedo was clearly matured and experienced. He had been wrought as the initial prototype for the children of the Omnissiah sometime during the Unification Wars. Sent out by the Omnissiah to prepare the galaxy for the conquest to come through division of labor and enemies. Malum Kaido, designed for administration, had optimized the expansion of his empire for this purpose. Allying with a branch faction of the Eldar for access to those two particular technologies, allying with Griffon for industrial capacity, and beginning a conquest of a region that was separated from the new Great Warp Storm in the galactic northwest by the light of the Astronomicon for further stability. The broad strategy, devoid of existing biases, was ideal for the creation of a stable vassal empire to support the Imperium as it expanded. The primary issue, of course, was that it currently relied on Xenos and xenotechnology to function as intended. Malum Kaido, having not fought Xenos on Terra or grown under the guidance of the Mechanicum, would have no prior biases against them. Would these Xenos seek to betray mankind? Inconclusive evidence. It was possible they would in time, it was possible they wouldn't. The ultimate issue arose from attempting to unify two entirely separate machines of society, one known, one unknown, and both bent towards servicing entirely separate organisms that composed their components, thus leading to this very precarious situation. It was quite troublesome overall. Pontus could not find it in himself to blame the second son of the Omnissiah for the conclusions reached. But if left unchecked, this could lead to a great schism in the Mechanicum, something that Pontus would do all within his power to avoid. His internal chronometer ticked over to 144 hours. Time was up. Time was up. Cease, he declared, silence following in the wake of his words once more. The allotted time frame for this exchange has expired. My analysis is complete. Waiting a moment to allow the younger priest to recalibrate briefly, he nodded his head and began. I am Archmagos Pontus. I speak now with the voice of the Fabricator. General, I speak now in Archmagos Dominatus, Dominus Electra CCLX50's own words and authority. Such is the traditional rank of the seat of Fabricator General, although the two positions are not technically conjoined. It was long known that the many branch mechanicums would require correction as stable lines of exchange were re-established, local conditions forcing deviations in order to maintain functionality. No less than 300 such branch mechanicums have been relocated thus far, and all have needed some degree of correction. In the worst instances, entire forge worlds have been assigned to purgation, their systems corrupted beyond all repair with the machinations of the Xeno, the Silica Animus, the Heretic. It was truly unfortunate that he spoke knowing that the judgment of Electra CCLX Vekand was of entirely political nature, matters of faith and reason taking secondary roles to ones of power and politicking. Although Geoffon has committed tech heresy, they are not tech heretics. With regards to their actions involving developing Empire Albion, subject designate Malum Kaido, and Xeno subfaction Exodite, there has only been a single instance type of definitive tech heresy. Every time a Griffon priest has traveled through the Warp Realm, webways, through a portal opened by Xeno machine Eldar Webway Portal Generator, has been a case of a member of faith directly benefiting from the use of a Xeno machine outside of the context of research. This is inarguably tech heresy. However, this instance type of tech heresy is well within the bounds of forgiveness as dictated by Mechanicum precedent, understandable given the circumstances at hand with regards to fulfilling obligations by alliance with an allied human power. For these instances of tech heresy, and understanding of the current obligations of Griffon, a temporary tithe shall be imposed. For each priest of Griffon that uses xenotechnology to travel sub-realm webway, 1 Skitari unit of standard quality must be produced and equipped, then gifted to Mars. This will be on a per-instance basis, and due on a 12 Martian year cycle. His servos warmed as he considered the next lines, and the headaches it would bring the Martian Parliament. It was, of course, completely necessary, and within his invested authority to declare. It would also give the Mechanicum time to resolve this matter in unofficial manners long before an official declaration had to be made. This is the foremost punishment levied unto Griffon. It is temporary, it will be addressed. In 72 standard Martian years, a universal council shall be held on a predetermined planet. This world shall be determined and declared in 12 standard Martian years. This universal council will be held to analyze and resolve all deviations present in all branch, mechanicums present in the galaxy, not just Griffon. With the time he had given them to research and develop purely human examples of the technology, Griffon would have the chance to wipe their records of tech heresy completely clear. It was the most he could do for them presently, because that was merely the official punishment, not the unofficial ones that Electra unfortunately required of him to bring Griffon more firmly under the control of Mars. With matters of official punishment set aside, we now turn to matters of faith. The words were foul in his processors. Griffon currently possesses 8 systems under its control, an accomplishment to celebrate. However, only having 8 core systems is spiritually imbalancing. To resolve this, Mars will dispatch 4 colonization fleets to Griffon, which will then be used to bring Griffonese total number of core systems to a more holy 12. Furthermore, Griffon possesses no less than 400 engines within its Titan Legion. This is well above the precedent standard of 50 per legion. Mars itself only had 450 engines within its 3 Titan Legions, although each was of masterful quality. These will be split into 12 legions, up to 50 each, 1 per core system. Worry not about producing the engines required to arm the 4 legions assigned to the Martian colonist fleets. These will be produced and provided by Mars. Insertion of Mars, controlled Magi, Skitarii and Titans into their core systems. With regards to the Charter of Z's, Griffon was most wise to mandate the clause on the use of xenotechnology requiring mechanicum approval. To aid in this, Mars will dispatch a delegation of learned priests and logis magi to aid in calculating the ramifications in allowing each example of xenotechnology to be used. Their wisdom and masterwork cogitators will aid Griffon in their decision-making whenever this topic arises from wider Albion. Insertion of data taps into their diplomatic decision-making. With regards to the use of Lady Petra to complete STCs, while it is utterly undoubtable that she is a child of the Omnisire and font of machine benedictions, such is still well outside the established allowances of precedent. To ensure that knowledge is preserved in the traditional manner, Griffon will deliver all original copies of any STC printouts and examples of technology they possess and gather to Mars. They may create copies of any patterns and holy knowledge found, of course, allowing them to still benefit from the wisdom therein. That last judgment weighed heaviest on his heart, and even those of the Martian delegation staggered with the declaration. Those of the Griffon delegation were stunned, cogitators looping over the last lines again and again. This was the true punishment. For how could they create copies of that which none could understand? Griffon would be stripped of its archaeotech, all artifacts of the holy past, all relics of a better time, handed over to Mars. Pontus did not protest his duty, but presently he loathed it. The meeting of Griffon and Mars came to a close with the judgment. The end was silent.